there's a diversity in the lifestyles that people had and that people have, and it ties in with again some of these allegations that I've mentioned before that say you pledge your allegiance and then you have to give up all your wealth, and this is the only way to come in, which is of course absolutely a lie. And I think this is one of the things that you and me, Holly, discussed, that that's not the constellation, that's not what you found here.
Right. And there are communities that are very functional communities, both things like the Catholic Church. If a woman joins a convent, she brings her savings as the equivalent of a dowry historically. There are communities where, if somebody joins the religion and they decide to adopt a communal lifestyle, the expectation is, yes, sign over your house, sign over your bank account, sign over all your property, you'll receive a stipend, if a small amount of money. And for people who want to make that choice, I believe they have that right. But then sometimes people have a negative impression of, oh, wow, that's a huge commitment. For you guys, there are people who have donated a great deal of their resources. There are also people who have joined who really didn't have a lot of money when they came in. And as you said, this was one of the surprises for me because since I study communes and utopias, communal societies, I was sort of working on the assumption that, yes, when people joined, they made massive, massive contributions. And in fact, some people have done that, but other people have really been able to retain, for the most part, an independent economic life. And for them, maybe they have a job in Crewe, they have their own house or their own apartment in Crewe, they're covering their own expenses. And then if they have surplus of money at the end of the month, they're donating to you, which is, to be perfectly honest, the way that many, many religious people, Christian people, Jewish people, Muslim people, Buddhist people live. You take care of your own resources, and if you have a surplus, you donate to the community, you donate to the religion. But it was very, very helpful for me to realize that there was actually a plurality of economic models depending on how much people wanted to be involved in the community, but that you could actually become a believer and nobody was going to say, give me your life savings. And yet the longer that I've been talking to you, I understand that it's not a policy, it's a gestalt of both sharing but not coercing. I think, that the value of, coercion is wrong, but humanity is first. Those two things together, I think, account for your economic model. And yet I'll say one other thing, which I think is very true, which is that it seems to me that the mutual aid system that you have developed here seems to be working. People are not deprived, people have decent clothing, they have access to cars when they need cars. If somebody wants to go downtown for a night just to go out to a movie and maybe get a drink, they can say, look, make sure that I have, 20 pounds in my, debit account. So if I want to go to the movies and get a drink, I have money to do it because I'm going downtown. And so in other words, I've had a lot of discussions with people about getting what they need. And I feel very confident that people are able to have their needs met here.
Absolutely.
In some communities, when resources become very tight, it becomes hard to make sure that everybody gets new shoes when they need new shoes. Or maybe, now, okay, the food budget is really, really grim and we're going to eat potatoes and frozen orange juice all winter. I know a group that had to do that. But you guys are living well.
Yeah.
And because you're living well, I think that that's a sign that you found a way to share in a way that's working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the conversations we had early on, I think it was in the very first day when you and me were talking, and you were trying to understand a little bit about what rules do we have in the community, and you would ask me, do you have a rule on this? I'd be like, no, it's people are left to make their own assessment. And she'd say, but do you have a rule on this? I said, not really. People choose, really. People are trusted to make their own decisions. And the conversation continued like this, where Holly in the end sat back and she said, you guys are the most non-coercive community that I have ever seen. So I thought that was...
Because look, it's not easy to do an intentional community. I've been studying this for a long time. I've seen groups that are successful, groups that are not successful, groups that are very regimented. and groups that are loosey-goosey. And so here's the thing. A group that is regimented can get short-term cooperation on projects, but then they have to deal with the fact that people feel they feel the weight, the friction, they chafe under the regimentation. But if you're loosey-goosey, nobody does the dishes, nobody works, nobody brings in money, nobody puts toilet paper in the bathroom. And I think that you have really sort of found like the Aristotelian golden mean in terms of saying, look, we have ways of doing things that have developed where there's a general routine of the day, the meals happen at a certain time, we have jobs that are known to happen, but you're not saying, okay, everybody has to wear the same thing. You're not saying that everybody has to come to dinner at a particular bell. You're not saying, oh, we have a ban on newspapers and we don't let people watch television or something like that, that people really do have a lot of personal space for decision making.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, I'll also say this, I've talked to communal people in many different groups, and my own perception is that there's a certain temperament that correlates very well with being communitarian. You have to care about people, and you have to be easygoing about, the sort of small thing,
little
difficulties,
issues, right.
little issues. You can't be a petty person. And so in that, I mean, I really see that too, that you guys are sort of just kind of a little bit generous with each other. And I think that that's actually also a very positive thing if you're going to want to do communitarianism.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think that it is a reflection because everything you've described right now in terms of how we live and our ideals and our principles, and Hadil can testify to this, is how we've always lived from the beginning of how this community started. And it's a reflection of what we've learned from the rise of Rabbi Sadiq. It's basically a continuation of his teachings that has led to us knowing how to make it work to the ideal standard that it is, thankfully. And it's getting more and more prosperous as time goes by.
Yeah, since 2011.
Yes.
And actually, can you share with us, this was so interesting, you were, before coming here, you shared with me and Alia this threshold about when a society becomes successful. And it was around the 15 years.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
So there was a famous book that came out in the early 1970s called Commitment and Community by Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, who's a professor at Harvard University. And she did this book as her dissertation at Harvard Business School to look at communal societies and how they successfully negotiated, day-to-day living operations, getting people on board with projects, creating consensus. And so she says, she looks at, I think, 60 or 80 different communities, and she's trying to come up with a measure of success. What's the metric for a successful community? And so she says, look, most people who start an intentional community, the communes are very, very short-lived. 1 year, 2 years, things fall apart very, very quickly. And so for her, the success measure is whether or not a community has lasted 15 years. And so in her study, successful communes, 15 years or longer. And unsuccessful, well, if they make it to 13, they're still unsuccessful. But you guys are at year 14.
Yes, we are.
In terms of being communal. And so you are very close to hitting Kantor's metric of, well, if she were to evaluate you, she'd have to say, okay, you're a successful community. How are you doing your decision-making? What is making you successful? And then I would say what's funny is, compared to what Kantor creates is like, the success recipe, you are breaking every rule. You don't ask people to sign away property. You don't tell people they can't read newspapers.
Not at all.
You don't segregate women and men. And so in those, you don't require celibacy. And so in all those respects, you accord people a great deal of the opportunities to live a normal life. And then I go back to the fact that there are people who feel happier when they're living with people. There are people who feel happier when they're not living an isolated, nuclear, independent nuclear life where the focus is my own bank account, my own retirement, but rather they want to be with people, and I realized this is not the dominant model for human society, but it's also not abnormal. There are many people who choose to live the way that you do, and it's not a pathology, it's not a mental problem, it's not a dangerous worldview. It is honestly a difference in temperament.
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually sort of key. It's temperament, because I keep on asking people, what do you do for downtime? And I keep on saying to people, I listen to all this old time radio. It's like headphones in my ears all the time. But the most common answer, I mean, I've heard from people, I like watching crime shows, I like watching Netflix, I like watching Fawlty Towers. So I know that you guys are doing sort of air quotes normal entertainment. But the most common answer I receive from people of what they want to do with their free time is like, we like to hang out.
Yeah.
We like to hang out with each other. There's always something fun going on.
I think that there's this kind of unified goal that we find between the two of you, and that is religious freedom, promoting religious freedom. This is something that you're both very passionate about and very invested in. And I think that in light of the conversation we've had right now about new religious movements, the idea that they do play a part in advancing religious freedom. Can you comment on that? Do they, and how do they do that?
Well, new religious movements are very often persecuted for their beliefs and their practices, despite the perspective or the misperception that, air quotes, cults are dangerous. New religious movements, more often than not, are law-abiding. But the reality is they very often find themselves in predicaments where they're at odds with governments of countries or governments of states, and they've had to, litigate for their rights. And when they're successful, there's a spillover effect that affects everybody else to the setting of precedent. So I think about, the Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States. I do a lot of work with them. I think they're great people. They've been very controversial sometimes in my country. But because I study them, I'm aware of the way they have been incredibly, incredibly important for just establishing conscience rights for everybody, not just for themselves. One of the things I said earlier, I think I've been improved by my visit here. One of the things I've been able to really, I teach Islam at home, but I confess that my conveyance of Islam has been inadequate compared to what I've learned here. And I very much understand that the emphasis on tolerance is carried through Abu Sadiq and extended to the community. But the other thing, since we're talking about religion, that one of the things that you have really resurrected in your understanding of what is positive from Islam is the emphasis on tolerance and non-coercion that really starts with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That, that your understanding of the Prophet is as a figure who doesn't promote coercion, but as a figure who promotes tolerance. In the West, there's a rhetoric of Islam as the religion of peace, and then unfortunately people who dislike Islam for bad reasons, they even make fun of this phrase. But I think in terms of the idea of Islam having an ethos of peace, I understand that you are post-Islamic, that you don't even necessarily use the terminology of saying we are Muslim, but I also think that in some ways, Europol is exemplary of the best aspects of Islam.
Thank you, Auri. I think you've expressed yourself very eloquently tonight. For everyone who's been listening, you have benefited us so much in this conversation. We're extremely honored that we were able to sit with you today and talk to you. And thank you so much for taking the time to come over and be a guest here at the Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light headquarters.